This is a public service announcement to every man in the audience. Today is February 8th. Next Friday is February 14th. That's Valentine's Day. Now, I can make that public service announcement because I went ahead and made reservations for where we're going to have dinner that day. So now Valentine's Day. Now, yes, there are all sorts of different traditions and ideas connected to it, but by and large, the general approach to it is it's a celebration of relationships, particularly the husband-wife relationship, the male-female relationship. It's a day that essentially celebrates a certain type of love. Estimates are that by this Friday, a new record will be set. Some $27.5 billion will be spent on Valentine's gifts and dinners and chocolates. In fact, the previous record was set in 2020, right before this thing called COVID hit. The previous record was in 2020, it was $27.4 billion. But that year, there was $2.8 billion spent in chocolate, 58 million pounds of chocolate. That's a lot of chocolate. It's something about keeping marriage sweet. Apparently, it's why we think we need to get those boxes of chocolates. Whatever the motivation, it's all right to celebrate that relationship. As a matter of fact, hopefully, we appreciate that it's a relationship that is as old as the dawn of time, because God gave it. Genesis 2:24, man shall leave father and mother, cleave to his wife, they shall be one flesh. As we continue our study of the church and the home, let's focus on the home. And let's focus on this relationship between husband and wife. Whereas the last hour we looked at loving God's house, we're going to take several ideas from there and expound upon them in the very specific context of the home and loving my spouse. When we talk about marriage, it's important to understand that when we talk about a Christian couple, now let's face it, there are several situations where people are in marriages that aren't Christian marriages, they aren't Christian couples, they're in marriages that aren't recognized in the sight of God. Our focus tonight is going to be on the Christian couple. And by and large, we're going to look at 4 features of a Christian couple. As we do, it'll be as easy as remembering 4, 3, 2, 1. If you can count down 4, 3, 2, 1, then you'll be all right. Now, if you had trouble with firecrackers at one point, you need to use the other hand. That'll be okay. But 4, 3, 2, 1. Marriage. The 4 stands for 4 kinds of love. We've already discussed how we'll often use the word love in different ways, whereas the Greeks were far more specific. Well, let's look at those 4 kinds of love as they pertain to the marriage. 3 kinds of commitment. Often we think of commitment and we just think of it in one direction, maybe 2, but there's another aspect of commitment that actually might be the most vital, but often it gets overlooked. 2 kinds of people and ultimately one ordained blueprint. 4 forms of love. We spoke the last hour about the ideas of agape, storge, philia, and we mentioned one called eros. Let's start there. Now, you ask a couple, why do you want to get married? Well, because we love each other. Terrific. What do they mean by that? You ask a couple later, why did you want to get married? Why did you marry? We loved each other. What's meant by that? The biblical description of the marriage involves these 4 forms of love. For instance, first there's eros. It's a physical love. We actually get the word erotic from it, that which pertains to the sensual. Eros would describe physical attraction. It would describe intimacy. When we talk about eros, it can often become a taboo topic. In fact, it's frequently the case that we shudder at hearing the word sex. And it has frequently been the case that the topic has been made so taboo that we've done a disservice to the next generation. When a young woman and a young man marry and she spends the honeymoon crying because she feels like she's done something dirty, because it's been portrayed as something dirty all of her life. We don't do that with other things that require waiting. When children start talking about wanting to drive, we don't say, oh no, you don't need to be driving, that's a dirty thing to do. When a young person starts talking about wanting to participate in the Lord's Supper, but it's a person that hasn't obeyed the gospel yet and doesn't understand, oh no, don't do that, it's dirty. Genesis 1:28, as soon as God made man and woman, He said, be fruitful and multiply. As old as the marriage relationship is, so is the physical aspect of that relationship. Genesis 2:24, leave father and mother, cleave to his wife, they shall be one flesh. That one flesh aspect of the relationship involves treating each other as self, Ephesians 5:27 and 28, but also the intimate aspect of the relationship, the physical connection. Paul would allude to that in 1 Corinthians 6. We can speak of the intimacy in marriage in terms that appreciate the relationship without defacing it. We can actually instill in our young people how this is a privilege for husband and wife. It's something that's beautiful, not filthy. That's how the Hebrews writer described it. Hebrews 13:4, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. In fact, it might be the case that there have been times when as much of a disservice has been done to marriage by the misportrayal of intimacy, making young people think it's filthy, as has been done to marriage by making it look flippant and promiscuity happening before they actually marry. Because either way, it has been put into a context that is far removed from what God intended it to be. We talk about eros, and that's going to be an aspect of the marriage. Physical attraction. That's not all there is to it, but it's going to be an important detail. And men and women are indeed different. Typically speaking, when it comes to the idea of eros, the male tends to have more of a desire, more regularity for it. The story was told of a man that took 1 Corinthians 7:3 and 4, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and the wife also to her husband. For the husband hath not power over his own body, but the wife also the husband. The idea being that my body belongs to my spouse. So he took that passage and hung it up over the headboard. He came home one day and saw Mark 14:8 in its place. Looked it up and it said, she hath done what she could. There are couples that can banter back and forth about the differences in this regard. But there are some serious aspects to it that we need to keep in mind. It's important in the relationship, and it's needed. For now, let's hit very briefly on some problems that can occur. Deterrence. Children, yes, can be a deterrent. You've heard some people describe children as birth control. Yes, they actually can be a deterrent, and so can illness or medical situations. There can be distractions. We're busy with life, or we're stressed. There's tension, or there are frustrations taking place, financial problems, destructions to that aspect of the relationship because there's one spouse that's overly critical, or one spouse that issues disrespect, or maybe there's an absence of forgiveness because of an issue taking place. Discourse. Their communication is poor, or there's no communication, or there's miscommunication, or there's sarcastic communication. Problems can include a disconnect because the expectations are different, or they have different priorities, and they're not working on getting those priorities together, or maybe there's a disconnect that goes deeper because one's involved in some form of secrecy and isn't open and forthcoming. Disinterest. Frequently this occurs when one spouse has a negative self-image of his or her physical form and thinks, well, because I wouldn't be attracted to me, my spouse can't be either. All the while there's a spouse that is looking forward to enjoying the marital privilege with his wife or with her husband, and is being robbed of it because someone is too focused on self to be selfless. There's the disinterest because of self-image, and sometimes there's just no drive or interest because of other health issues as it pertains to change in chemistry of the body as he or she ages. Then there's damage caused by past trauma. Couples need to talk about these things. We live in a world where it is reported that 1 in every 4 women has experienced some form of unwanted sexual contact, and that's what's reported. chances are the numbers are far higher. Every couple needs to talk about the possibility of past trauma. Because there may be things that are completely outside of the radar of her interest or his interest because of something that's happened to that person, that the spouse needs to understand why. The spouse needs to understand, we don't go there. We don't engage in this. We don't do that. Because this is going to bring up negative memories. This is going to bring up post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's past trauma. Or sometimes there's damage done by past betrayal. And then another problem is just, one is too demanding. There's an impatience. There's not a compromise in terms of frequency. When we talk about eros, it is absolutely an aspect of the marriage according to Hebrews 13:4. And it's one that requires some communication and consideration. But that's not the only aspect of the marriage. In fact, if that's the only thing that is involved in the love and the connection, then here's going to be trouble. So another aspect of the love in the marriage is going to be storge. It's that family love. When Paul told the Roman brethren, be kindly affectioned one to another, he encouraged them to love each other like family. Well, the closest family member you're ever going to have is going to be your spouse. We say that because Jesus said, what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Regarding the marriage, there's no person that is to be of a closer familial relationship than the spouse. Not mom, not dad, not son, not daughter. This can be a very strong challenge when either he or she has a child because of past experiences before they marry. And there's a strong tendency to want to protect and provide for this child. But when husband and wife say, I do, they are entering into a bond ordained by God to be one that none ought to be able to come between. Now, let there be no doubt, and the children might not like me after I say this, but one of the biggest threats to your marriage is your children. Because they know how to read mom and dad. They know how to pit one against another. But kids, here's the thing. Your parents knew how to do it too when they were kids. So I'm not telling them anything they don't know. It's just a matter of we need to be aware of the fact that we're to be on the same page. There's no family member to come between us and our spouses. When they're newly married and he keeps talking about how much better mama's cooking was. Well, how well does that go? Or when they're newly married and she keeps talking about how much wiser her daddy is, and he wouldn't have done it this way and he wouldn't have done it that way. Or when they're newly married, and instead of talking to him about an issue, she goes and talks to mom or sis. Or they're newly married. And instead of discussing a situation with her and making a decision together, he goes and he sees what dad's going to do. Not that there's anything wrong with reaching out to family for advice and counsel. But it's going to feel like betrayal if they're not on the same page about seeking outside counsel first. He's going to feel betrayed, and it's going to last for years. She's going to feel betrayed, and it'll feel the same way. So the closest family member is to be the spouse. I heard one preacher say, when you get married, put 3 bridges between you and the in-laws and burn 2 of them. Well, hopefully that's not necessary. But hopefully we also appreciate the nature of this relationship. And for those of us who are of an age to have children that are marrying, hopefully we appreciate the nature of that relationship, that we'll give them space to make their mistakes, realizing we had to make our own. And still let them know that there's the grace for us to help if it's ever needed. So there's the storge love, the closest family member. And then there's the philia love. It's a friendship love. We discussed this earlier, commonality and camaraderie. Husband and wife ought to be friends. This requires practice. Titus 2:4, this was actually a friendship love that Paul described when he said for the younger women to learn to love their husbands. A woman has to learn to be her husband's friend because husbands and wives interact with their friends differently. When women are together, they're talking about important things. When men are together, they're probably not talking at all. They're watching a golf ball fly, or they're watching a football game, or they're turning wrenches. But they don't want to talk about the important things because that makes the situation more uncomfortable for them. They look at problems differently. And we'll get to more of that later. But for now, if husband and wife are going to develop their friendship, that means that it's going to require him being willing to behave with her the way she behaves with her friends. No, that doesn't mean he goes and tries on dresses. The way he behaves with her like she would behave with her friends means he's going to be there to listen. He might go with her shopping and let her talk and talk with her about things that are important to her while they shop. And if she's going to be his friend, that means she's going to sit there and watch the football game and not feel like she's wasting 3 hours, because for him, that's 3 hours spent side by side, comfortable and relaxed. They develop a friendship with each other. If one of them is interested in tennis and the other is interested in golf, well, then they compromise and they try to do both together instead of going their separate ways. And when it comes to other friends, in counseling couples, I've often asked, who's your best friend? And when he replies, well, Ted, or she replies, Tina, I say, not as of the wedding date. Because if he or she has any closer friend than the spouse, then it's not the kind of marriage that God would want it to be. They ought to be one another's best friends. It's not wrong for them to have other friends, but they need to be careful in that regard. Also, when we talk about this friendship aspect, it's going to be very important for both to remember that strong friendships with those of the opposite sex will always be a danger to the marriage. And those are always to be approached delicately, prudently, cautiously. That doesn't mean those friendships are disbanded, but that does mean that those friendships are going to bring my spouse into it. And because my spouse is part of me, the two shall be one flesh. And if we can't be friends with this person for whatever reason, then I can't be. When we talk about friendship love, he and she are one another's best friends. They want to spend time together. He doesn't want to get off work and just hang out with the guys all night. She doesn't want to get off work and spend time with her friends. They want to be with each other. Yes, there's time for them to spend with other friends, but priority is spouse. Eros, storge, philia, and then there's agape. Agape is what we'll call that full love. It's what Paul described in Ephesians 5 when he said, husbands, love your wives. It's the love that says, I love you because you're worth it, as we discussed in the previous hour. And without venturing back into that explanation, it's the love described in 1 Corinthians 13. The love that says, I love you because you're worth it, is what Paul was detailing when he encouraged the Corinthians about the solutions to their problems as a church. And every wedding you've ever attended has always had some reference to 1 Corinthians 13. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Paul was not conducting a wedding ceremony when he penned those words. That doesn't mean they're not applicable to the marriage. In fact, think about the application of 1 Corinthians 13 and the way this kind of love will behave in the home. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity suffers long. That means macrothumia, long of wrath. That means she's long of wrath because he leaves the shower curtain open or the lid up. That means he's long of wrath because every time he brushes his teeth, he knocks over one makeup container that knocks over another and another and another and another. That means they're not going to lose their temper over the small things that might be a pet peeve to her or a pet peeve to him. They'll talk about those things, they'll work through them, and they'll give each other grace for moments of forgetfulness. But they're not going to turn every inconvenience into a knockdown, drag out, a source of contention, a source of strain. Charity suffereth long and is kind. The word translated kind carries the idea of gentle. It's going to be gentle in words and gentle in behavior. Typically speaking, the husband is stronger than the wife. But there are marriages where her words are far stronger than his. Because she knows that he would never hurt a woman, but she doesn't care about hurting him with her words. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. both ought to be as gentle in word and deed with each other as we would ever expect him to be with her, just in terms of physical behavior. Charity's gentle. It doesn't try to poke and prod. It doesn't go out to break. Suffereth long and is kind. It envieth not, vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. It's not about elevating self, declaring self, displaying self. Did you ever stop to think about how envy can play into a marriage? About how maybe the husband is jealous of the wife because she gets to spend more time with the children, but he's at work more. Or then the wife is jealous of the husband because he's outside of the house working, and here I am stuck at home with the kids and I don't get to go out and see the world. And he comes home and he's envious of her because she's got it made. She's envious of him because he's got it made. And neither stop to look at the challenges and obstacles that the other might face. Envy. Sometimes they can be envious of the way that the in-laws treat them. Envy. There's no place for it in the marriage. Envieth not, vaunteth not itself. Vaunteth self is to publicize or elevate self. Have you ever stopped to think about how, when I'm trying to lift myself up, which way am I pulling on everyone else? And where am I pushing them? And we've seen situations where he was elevating himself at her expense, or she was elevating herself at his expense. Because she'll be the one that every time something is mentioned, when she's talking to the other sisters in the congregation, it's going to have to do with some punchline about him, or some shortcoming of him, or some pitfall of him. And he'll do the same thing with her, and she's a constant punchline at her expense. And we're not talking about those beloved ways that men and women are different and we can chuckle at just those distinctions and innocence. We're talking about times when each is just nitpicking and deriding the other, because the only way to make myself look big in front of the fellas is to deride my wife. You puny soul. That's not how love operates. It suffers long and is kind. It envieth not, it vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. It doesn't behave itself unseemly. It doesn't behave rudely. It doesn't seek its own. It's not easily provoked. Now let's bring all those together. Rude deliberately provokes. Ladies, do you know how to push your husband's buttons? Have you ever done it? I'm here to tell you, in counseling couples, and I won't tell you how many dozens of couples I've counseled, every time that question is answered by her with, yes, I know how to push his buttons, and yes, I've done it. It's funny, in asking the question the other way, men, do you know how to push your husband's buttons? Or, men, do you know how to push your wife's buttons? Half the time he goes, I never mean to do it. I didn't even realize I was pushing a button. And sometimes he'll say, yeah, but I don't want to push them. Ladies, the men are being honest. Because unless you're married to a jerk, he doesn't set out to push your buttons. If you've got a husband that does that, he's got some changes to make. But if I set out to push my spouse's buttons just because I feel like I'm losing the argument, so I'm going to make her as mad as I am, that's not how love behaves. I don't set out to be rude, and it's not about being easily provoked. Not easily provoked. Not getting mad at the drop of a hat. Not the one that's going to fly off the handle. Thinketh no evil. 1 Corinthians 13:5. That means it doesn't keep score. Agape love doesn't keep score. There are couples that keep a running tally of who won the last fight. From this point forward, for as long as you all shall live, please promise that you'll never fight again. There never has to be a fight in a marriage. There can be disagreements. There can be conversations. But when there's a fight, then they are keeping score. They're trying to see who's up on top. But when it's two members of the same team in the huddle talking through the best approach to the next move as they go out and face the world, it's not a fight. It's not even an argument. It's a discussion. It might be a disagreement, but they're going to be working together to stay together to strengthen one another. There's no place for keeping score. Charity suffers long and is kind. It doesn't envy. It doesn't vaunt itself. It's not puffed up. It doesn't seek its own. It's not easily provoked. It thinketh no evil. Rejoices in all things. Now, we think about the description given of the love and the way that it applies to marriage, can the husband look at his wife and say, you're worth it? I'm not going to get mad over the slightest thing. Can she look at him and say, you're worth it? And I'm not going to overreact to the mess in the floor. Can he look at her and say, you're worth it? And I'm not going to overreact when you park a little bit too far over and it's an inconvenience. Can she look at him and say, you're worth it? And I'm not going to overreact when you don't call as soon as I think you should. I love you because you're worth it. There are so many different non-issues that become issues because we see the issues as worth more than the spouse. The marriage involves 4 kinds of love. But we move forward. Also 3 threads of commitment. 3 threads. Well, Jesus put it this way. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. They're no more twain, but one flesh, and God has joined them together. Thus, there are 3 entities involved in the marriage, him, her, and God. And there is to be a commitment regarding each one. He or she has to be able to be committed to self. Well, wait, that sounds self-centered. No. Think about the way Paul put it when he wrote to the Ephesians. Ephesians 5:28, husbands, love your wives even as yourselves. For no man ever yet hated his own body, but nourisheth it, even as Christ the church. Folks, there are times when he's a gentle soul. He's not the one that has everyone's attention. He's not the one that is most popular, the lead athlete, but he's a gentle and a good guy. And for whatever reason, she's the one that folks always seem to turn and look at her. She has everyone's eye. She's friendly. She's the social butterfly. And she interacts with him, and he treats her in a genuine way. She knows that he doesn't have ulterior motives. He's just behaving toward her as an innocent and a kind individual. He sees himself as not worthy of her attention, but he wants to treat her kindly. And that leads to a situation where she starts to have an attraction to him. And before long, they're a couple, and everybody's saying, well, how did he get her? Well, what happened was all of those interactions resulted in a growing connection that ventured into a physical attraction and crossed the threshold into romantic interest. But one of the things that can happen is if he never comes to have a semblance of his own worth, his own value, then before long, I don't deserve her. I don't deserve her. What's she doing with me? Well, if she's with me, there must be something wrong with her. Counseled couples that went through this very thing, and it led to his infidelity. The problem was he didn't know who he was, and he had no sense of self. Proverbs 6:32 is an astounding statement if we take the Hebrew apart. He that committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. The word translated understanding is the Hebrew word lab or labab, and it carries the idea of the center, the core, the very heart of the individual. It's a person's identity. The person that commits adultery with a woman has no center. He doesn't know who he is. You ever heard of a midlife crisis? It's an identity crisis. You ever know of individuals that you never thought they would have engaged in that behavior, but right in the middle of an identity crisis, he didn't know who he was. He lost sight of who he was supposed to be. It doesn't justify the decisions, but it helps explain the thought process. The one that has no sense of self, no sense of who he is or what he is, and no appreciation for what he is susceptible to that kind of behavior. No man ever yet hated himself, but his flesh, but loveth it, nourisheth it, even as Christ the church. Paul would spring from that idea to talk about the twain being one flesh. If he doesn't know how to take care of and appreciate self, then he will struggle to take care of and appreciate her. And that goes both ways. So if I'm going to be the husband that the Lord has called me to be, or the wife that the Lord has called me to be, as the case might be, there has to be a recognition of sense of self. Enough of a commitment to self to ask some questions before the marriage. Those questions before the marriage would be, is it lust? Is it luster, or is it love? These are important questions. Is it lust? They're just getting married in order to take advantage of the marriage bed. That's it. Getting married just for the physical sensation is like jumping out of a car at 65 miles an hour just to feel the wind in your face. It'll be fun for a minute, but it's going to end very tragically. Is it lust? Is it just about the thrill? Is it luster? You know what luster is? You remember the old poem about the luster of new fallen snow? Luster is a sparkle and a shine and a shimmer. And how often do we tell couples, you look so good together? You just look good together. We tell the homecoming queen and the star quarterback, you look so good together. And everyone has told them, well, we look good together. We must be a couple. We must be right for each other. They have nothing in common. They can't carry a conversation. Their interests are all over the place. But everyone tells them you belong together. They just look good, but they're not compatible. Is it lust? Is it luster? Or is it love? Is it a proper physical attraction, genuine and innocent? Is it a proper desire to be friends, to be family? And is it a genuine concern, agape, for one another? Questions to ask before. Now, if they're already married, too late to ask, is it lust, is it love, or is it luster? Now it's time to be committed enough to self to make it loving. I'm going to make it what I'm supposed to make it. I'm going to do everything I can to be the husband or the wife that I can be, that I'm supposed to be. Because when we'll make it loving, then we're doing all we can to make it lasting. Commitment to self. But let's move this forward. Not only is there commitment to self, but in marriage there's a commitment to spouse. Twain shall be one flesh. This commitment to spouse is one that we often take for granted. It seems obvious, but think about how this should play out. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Yes. Think about the different roles that are involved in this, because his role is different than hers, and we can investigate this more momentarily, but for now, if each will think in these three areas, God has given strengths for me to see. Do I see her strengths? Maybe she's better with people than I am. Maybe she's better with money. Maybe she's better with the children or with family. Or maybe she's better with keeping up with birthdays or names. Maybe she's better with numbers. Maybe she's better with facts. Maybe she's better with kindness and compassion. Do I see her strengths? Do I identify where I can learn from her, or I can lean on her? And is she doing the same thing? There are strengths to see, and there are roles to respect. Those roles are going to be different. And those roles are not defined by what mom and dad did. Often when couples come together, he has expectations based on what he's seen. She has expectations based upon what she's seen. And one thing to ask couples, who is the model of the husband you want to be and why? He'll often answer and he'll give the reasons. Who's the model of the husband you don't want to be and why? He'll answer and he'll give the things he's afraid of ever becoming. Ask her the same questions, and they get to hear each other talk about their greatest objectives and their greatest fears. And they also get to hear what considerations might not be on the radar, because in those instances, what's not said can be just as important as what is said. Why does that apply? Because when we're talking about respecting the different roles, there are times when all that she knows about marriage is that her daddy left when she was 2, and men are scum, but I found one that I think I can put up with him. And there are times that all he knows about marriage is daddy left when I was 2, and I just know mama was always right, and my wife will be too. You know, in both of those circumstances, it's going to be hard for her to be the wife she ought to be and him to be the husband he ought. Sometimes they've had both parents, but they didn't see the proper behaviors on the part of their parents, and that's impacted what their expectations are. We have God-given strengths to see. Are we appreciating each other? We have God-given roles to respect. Do we respect the roles as God gave them, or are we just basing it on what we've always heard or seen? And then we've got God-given talents to Teen. If we can take her strengths and let them compensate for my weaknesses, instead of turning it into a competition. Well, I'm going to be better than her at this and better than her at that and make her feel like she's below me. Will we be committed enough to each other, to complement each other, to strengthen the relationship, and to be better together than we could ever be apart? Three threads of commitment. Commitment to self, commitment to spouse, and yes, commitment to God. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Now, please don't misunderstand. We're not putting God down the line in terms of priority. As a matter of fact, He comes first. Luke 14:26, if any man come after me and hate not father, mother, wife, children, brother, sister, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. God comes first. In putting Him first, that means it's going to give us a proper perspective on who we ought to be and what our spouse ought to be to us. Let's go ahead and move forward. 4 forms of love. Do we practice them? 3 threads of commitment. Are we holding to all 3? Husband, wife, do you know who you are? Do you appreciate that spouse? Do you? Do you cling to God? 2 kinds of people. This is a no-brainer, right? Dudes and dudettes. He's and she's. Men and women. Husband and wife. Paul, in writing to the Ephesians, would summarize the statements that he made pertaining to marriage this way. Ephesians 5:33, nevertheless, let every one of you see that he love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. In Ephesians 5:33, Paul conveyed the needs of the wife from the husband and the husband from the wife. The husband is told to give the wife love because that's what she needs. She needs the hug. She needs the tenderness. She needs the kindness. She needs the gentleness. The wife is told to give her husband respect because while he needs the hug, he needs the pat on the back more. While he needs her adoration, he needs her admiration. Ladies, he needs to know he's your hero. Gentlemen, she needs to know that she's your everything. Now, if we understand that his needs are different than hers, then we can get a good idea of how to strengthen the relationship. Jesus would say, all things you would do, men do unto you, do you even so unto them. We summarize this as do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But part of do unto others involves observing others, seeing what their needs are. And when those others are different, then doing for that person as I would have done to me is not going to benefit that person if that person has different needs and priorities. Husbands and wives have different needs and priorities. We mentioned Willard F. Harley Jr. earlier, that counselor that had identified these disparities between husbands and wives. And one of the things he found that these couples were working hard to save their marriages. He was doing everything that he thought would give him positive responses, but it wasn't working. She was doing everything that she thought would cause a positive response in her, and she was trying to do that for him, but it wasn't working. The problem was the things that would cause a positive reaction in her were the lower priorities for him. And the top priorities for him were the lowest priorities for her. We're different. We're made differently. And as such, it behooves us to recognize some of those differences. Let's endeavor to do that. Let's think about what it is that she needs. A 6-letter word, couple. Each letter stands for an idea. She needs to be a couple. And as such, she needs closeness. Part of him giving her the love, agape, she desires is a closeness. Physical in body, emotional in heart, spiritual in spirit. She needs to be close in all of these ways. When she has a relationship with God and he doesn't, she will feel ever disconnected from her husband, even more so than he'll feel from his wife if the roles were reversed. She needs that closeness. And that closeness can't just be at 11 o'clock at night. And intimacy can't just be limited for after the day is done and they're both exhausted and they come together for a brief period of time and then just quickly fall asleep. She needs daily attention. She needs interaction that's face to face, because when women interact with each other and have a serious conversation, they look each other in the eye. Men don't do that. If you see two men having a conversation and they're looking each other in the eye, then they are taking up a posture of intimidation. Typically, sales reps know how to do that without it being intimidating, but if you see two ordinary fellows having a conversation, they're looking each other in the eye, chances are you're going, oh, we got trouble here. And ladies, the reason your husband doesn't look you in the eye is not because he's lying. It's because his most comfortable form of communication is when he doesn't have to stare you in the eye to prove he's being honest. When he can be comfortable and relaxed and just look at this item or that item while he's speaking. When he can think about what he's saying without having to prove himself as he says it. Gentlemen, she needs eye contact. So there are times that we have to be willing to look them in the eye for the conversation. She needs the closeness that lets her know that they're on the same page. She needs the closeness that lets her know that he needs her at all times. Garth Brooks sang a song. The first verse says, he could see the storm clouds rolling across the hill, barely beat the rain in from the field. Between the back doors slamming, she heard him say, curse this rain and curse this wasted day. But she'd been waiting for this day for oh so long. She was standing in the kitchen with nothing but her apron on. And in disbelief, they stood and they stared a while. And when their eyes met, they both began to smile. Somewhere other than the night, she needs to hear, I love you. Somewhere other than the night, she needs to know you care. She wants to know she's needed. She needs to be held tight somewhere other than the night. There's a lot of truth there. Now, granted, there are a lot of things that have come out of Garth's mouth that never should have gone in there. Frankly, it looks like a lot of things went in there that never should have gone in there. But that one has a point. She needs closeness. Matter of fact, she desires this. We think about the words of Genesis 2:24, cleave to his wife. Or the way it's described in Song of Solomon chapter 3, I found him whom my soul loves and would not let him go. She needs closeness. She also needs openness. He can't shut her out of his life. She is his life. Now, ladies, there's an interesting thing among so many women. They go out looking for a man that's mysterious, and then they're baffled that he won't be open with them down the road. Well, you got what you sought. But gentlemen, she needs openness. She needs to know that she's a part of the life. She needs to know that he's reachable. She needs to know that he's acknowledging a situation as it is. She needs to know that he will admit when there's a presence of a problem. Now, ladies, there's a reason why men typically are slow to acknowledge the presence of a problem. Gentlemen, I'm going to let them know. You'll have to forgive me, but I'm going to let them behind the curtains here. He wants to be your hero. He wants to be the one on the white horse, in the armor, the white knight. And if he admits the presence of a problem but doesn't have the solution, he might not be able to be the hero. But if he waits to admit the problem whenever he's finally figured out the solution, dun dun dun, he just wants to be the hero. He doesn't realize that there are times when he's going to be more heroic in your eyes because you've seen him have to work through it. Cut him a little bit of slack. But gentlemen, we have to be willing to say the words, I'm not sure. I don't know right now. Yes, this is a problem. This is an issue. Maybe it's a financial issue. Maybe it's a family issue. They need to be able to work through it with their husbands. They need us to be open enough to communicate. They need us to be open enough to let them know what our emotions are. Gentlemen, here's a hard one. There might be times that she says something and it comes across the wrong way, and instead of reacting, we just stay quiet. We stall up. Instead of saying, do you know how that made me feel? Oh, Scott, I can't say that. She needs to know. Matter of fact, ladies, there are times you need to ask that same question. Because in so doing, we give our spouses an opportunity to say, you know what, I didn't realize that impacted that way. I didn't realize that came across that way. I didn't realize it sounded that way. I didn't realize I was being rude or inconsiderate. She needs openness. The kind of openness that admits the presence of a problem. The kind of openness that will actually share emotions and in a proper demonstration of them. Matter of fact, if he wants her to be open to him physically, 1 Corinthians 7, 3 and 4, then he needs to render her the same sort of due benevolence of being open to her emotionally. She needs closeness, she needs openness, she needs understanding. 1 Peter 3, 7, believe it or not, Peter said men can understand their wives. Now, he didn't say men can understand all women. I'll never understand all women. No woman will ever understand all women, just like no man is ever going to understand all men. But 1 Peter 3, 7, Peter said, husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge. The American Standard has according to understanding. Husbands, you can understand your wives. It takes effort. It takes paying attention. It takes learning. It takes thinking. But it's possible. In that same passage, he said, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. Almost every woman you'll meet wants the world to see her as tough, no nonsense, and a force with which to be reckoned. But she wants her husband to see her as soft, vulnerable, and deceivable. She needs him to see her as fragile. Do we treat them that way, in word and deed? Part of understanding involves seeing things from another person's perspective. We can't read other people's minds, but we can try to look at things from another person's perspective. And part of understanding is going to involve this. There are times that she wants to talk about an issue. She comes home at the end of a work day, or you've come home and she's talking about something that happened during the day. And as she explains it, remember, he wants to be the knight. He wants to be the hero. And so as soon as he's heard enough that he thinks he has the answer, boom, he gives the answer. I've solved the problem. Confetti falls, light shine, music plays, and she scowls. Because what he didn't realize was, as she was conveying the issue throughout the day, it's not that she's not thought through the problem and arrived at a potential solution. She's going back through her emotions. And she's wanting to revisit them, and she needs his input on whether or not he thinks her emotional reaction was right. She needs him to practice the understanding that will look at her and say, sweetheart, do you need me to listen or do you need me to solve it? It's okay to say that. There'll be times that she'll say, well, I need you to solve it. Well, what do we do? There'll be times she'll say, just need you to listen. Closeness, openness, understanding, peacemaking. Ephesians 4:26, be angry and sin not. One day this is going to happen. He comes home, the house smells terrific. And she meets him and says, hey, honey, how are you? And just greets him, bubbly. And then there's I need to talk to you about something. There was a light that came on in the car a few days ago. You know Aladdin's magic lamp? It kind of looked like that. I thought if it was important, it would get brighter or a buzzer would go off or something. Anyway, there was this really loud bang while driving today. The mechanic said something about a blown head, $6,000. Now, his first thought is going to be, how could you be so... Don't finish that sentence. Don't even finish it. Because there's going to be a time that you did something equally unthoughtful and equally expensive, and you don't want her saying, how could you be so... You don't want her to finish that sentence either. The question to ask in those moments is, what's more valuable, my anger or our relationship? She needs peacemaking. She needs to know that she can share with him mistakes and troubles and difficulties and challenges, and he's going to be able to keep a level head. Not that he won't be angry, but he's not going to let the anger get the better of him. She needs to know that her home is a safe place, and that he is one that can de-escalate instead of escalate. He can diffuse instead of explode. closeness, openness, understanding, peacemaking, loyalty. Gentlemen, if you are dating, engaged, married, or have been married for any period of time, there is a 4-word question that she has asked repeatedly. Anyone know what it is? Take a stab. Nobody? I'll give you a hint. The first word is do. Do you? What is it? Do you love me? There's a reason she asked that question. It's because she needs to know. She's not just looking for information. She's looking for reassurance. She knows that historically speaking, the man has been more susceptible to infidelity. And she needs to know that he's drinking waters out of his own cistern, running waters out of his own well, Proverbs 5:15. She needs to know that she is the one that satisfies him at all times, and that he is ravished always with her love and hers alone, Proverbs 5:19. She needs to know that it's not just an I love you, but there is a loyalty there, that she is the one and only one. She needs to hear it. Don't ever hang up the phone without saying I love you. Don't ever hang up or walk out of the room without saying I love you. Don't ever pillow your heads at night or start the morning without an expression of I love you. And if you say it enough, then she'll rarely ask. Oh, she'll still ask every now and then. But if you say it enough, she'll rarely have to ask. Because there'll be no doubt. Don't just say it. Show it. The loyalty, and she needs esteem. Giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. Honoring her. That's going to involve compliments. As Solomon would say, Song of Solomon 7:6, how fair and how pleasant art thou, O love, for delights. That's a compliment. It means you're pretty. And it goes far beyond that, but it's a compliment. However, don't only compliment her physically. Because if that's the case, then 2 things are going to happen. One, she's going to think that her only features and attributes and benefits and strengths are her physical appearance. And as age comes and she sees changes that she doesn't like, she's going to think that she's lost all positive benefit, and it's going to have a negative impact upon her. Compliment the way she treats the children. Compliment the way that she strengthens other people, the way that she lights up a room. Compliment who she is, not just what she is. These are the things that she needs. She needs to be a couple. Closeness, openness, understanding, peacemaking, loyalty, esteem. But then there are the things that he needs. Ladies, he needs your reverence. And the best way for you to give him that reverence is to let him please you. We're going to use the word please. The P stands for provider. That's the job God gave him. He set Adam in the garden, and he said, dress it and keep it. 1 Timothy 5:8, if a man will not, he that careth not, provides not for his own house is denied the faith, and he's worse than an infidel. He is wired to provide. As a matter of fact, every time I ask those couples, husband, who's the husband you most want to emulate and why? Well, he's a provider. I say every time, 90%. Interestingly, that's one of the key areas of problems in a marriage, is he's so focused on providing that he misses some other needs. Ladies, he's afraid that he's going to fail you. He needs to be a provider. And if it's ever the case that his income isn't enough to get you over the hump, or you make more than him, don't rub that in his face. Because if you do, he'll never forget it. And if it's ever the case that he's not able to work because of some incapacity, he's going to need encouragement. Because a very fiber of his being has been cut in half. And whenever he seems to be trying to work too much, and you wonder if he's spending enough time with the family, there's a sentence that you can't use. And the sentence is this: I'm more important than your work. You can't say that because his job is his identity. He defines himself as that. You talk to a 16-year-old bag boy at the grocery store, and you're going to find out he's a bag boy within 2 minutes of talking to him, even if you're not at the store. You talk to a man who's a 55-year-old engineer, within 2 minutes of talking, you'll find out what he does for a living, because his job is his identity. It's not just what he does, it's who he is, and it's how he provides for his family. And when you, his heart and soul, tell him your job is less important than I am, what you've just told him is you're not doing enough. You're not good enough. You're a failure. The way to approach it is going to be, can we talk about the time? Can we talk about priorities? Sometimes it's going to be a matter of making sure that you're not saying, we need to get this and we need to get that. We want to buy this and we want to buy that. Because every time he hears about a purchase, he's thinking about more work that needs done. He wants to be the provider. Let him be the provider. And help him to know when he's provided what needs provided. And when you need just his time. Provider. L stands for logical. He bases decisions on rationale, reason. Everything to him is a math problem. 2 + 2 = 4. Ladies tend to be more inclined to think emotionally also. Whereas with him, emotions will come into play, but they're not as prominent. That's why he doesn't enjoy revisiting situations and talking through them and revisiting the emotions, because that's not how he works through situations. His decision is to go beyond just her hunch. You know, the first time woman's intuition was employed, guess what happened? They took of the fruit and did eat it. Genesis 3. Women's intuition is right about half the time, which is equivalent to a quarter flip. God has made him a certain way and given him the responsibility to make decisions. Let him make them. Adam was not deceived, 1 Timothy 2:14. He just didn't make the decision. And it all fell apart. Now, with this logical mindset, there's going to be an investigative element to it. He's going to be trying to gain information. For instance, sometimes he's going to ask questions with a childlike innocence. Husbands, you can never say this. We've already given her a sentence she can't say, so we're going to make this fair. Gentlemen, you can never ask this question. But there are going times that he'll ask questions with the sense of, have you gained weight? He didn't mean anything by it. Now, if your friends were to say that, you know that they're being snide. They're giving hints. He was literally just trying to get information. He didn't know if it was the way a pair of pants were fitting. Gentlemen, you can't use that. If you say it, she's allowed to get the rolling pin. Don't call me. But the point is this. There are going to be times that he says something that he never meant it to come across the way it seemed. He's just gathering information. On those occasions, ask him, do you know how that made me feel? But give him the grace to think through things the way his mind needs to do. Provider, logical. He needs your esteem. Ephesians 5:33, let the wife see that she reverence her husband. He is incapable of submitting in the marital role. She's not. He is made and wired to need to have authority in one area, and that's going to be the home. Matter of fact, moms, if you've got teenage boys, this is important to remember. Because teenagers aren't being reared the same way they were when they're toddlers. And when they're teenage boys, they're coming to the point of needing to learn assertiveness while at the same time recognize the authority structure. And if they keep getting their wings clipped and snipped by a mom that's not allowing them to make their mistakes, there's going to be a resentment there. They need to learn how to be assertive enough to have authority in their own homes, or else it won't be them that's running their homes. That's a fine line to walk, moms. It really is. I'm glad I'm a dad. I can just knock them around. He needs esteem in the home situation, especially from his bride. And if she ever denies him that, if her behavior toward him or treatment of him is disrespectful, even if it's just in words, it will do damage that will last for decades. Proverbs 10:19, in the multitude of words there wanteth not sin. Be mindful of what the behavior conveys. He needs the esteem, and God has given him the authority. Ephesians 5:23, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. But I disagree with them. God doesn't care. Is it a matter of sin? Okay. It's not a matter of sin. Well, then he's got to make decisions. No man ever made a decision, no good husband, let me put it that way, ever woke up in the morning and said, hey, I'm going to see how I can make her mad today. That sounds like a great idea. Instead, anytime he's willing to make a decision that's not what he knows she prefers, she needs to be looking at it in terms of he's trying to do the best he can. He might make mistakes. And on those occasions, the last thing he needs to hear is, I told you so. There might be lessons to learn. But God gave him the authority, not because God made a mistake, because God knows what He's doing. He needs the authority. He needs to be your shoulder. Proverbs 31:11, the heart of her husband safely trusts in her. He can count on her because he knows she counts on him. There's a statement made in Song of Solomon 7. She comes up from the wilderness leaning on her beloved. Yes, he wants to be your shoulder, the shoulder on which you put your head, but also it's worth noting that he communicates shoulder to shoulder. And so that quality time spent with him is going to be spent not having to look each other in the eye, as mentioned earlier. And then finally, he needs to be the provider, logical. He needs the esteem. He needs the authority. That's how God made him. He needs to be your shoulder. We don't have an English word for this one, but a Greek word fits it really well. Eros. This is frequently the number one need of a husband. And it's not because he's sensually minded. It's because whereas she conveys love and admiration through affection and tenderness, he conveys it through intimacy. We live in a world that has so perverted the idea of intimacy that it's tried to disconnect it from the affection and the emotion that it inherently has in his mind. But it can be reinstilled. It can't be cheapened. Husbands have to be careful not to cheapen it by just expecting intimacy on demand, and wives have to be careful not to cheapen it by turning it into a bartering system. Well, you can have this if I can have that. You know, there are people that trade those sort of sensual favors for physical benefits. We have a term for those, and that's not what a Christian woman is. We want to be careful about cheapening it by turning it into a burden for him even to express his desire. So often it's the case that a reaction comes toward him that's hardly different from a mom telling a child he can't have a cookie. Instead of reaching for his hand as it reaches for her and saying, "Sweetheart, I would love to meet your needs. Right now I can't." When we talk about this particular area, it's going to be important to keep a couple of things in mind, especially as it pertains to them being such a strong need for him. And as that goes, he tends to approach it differently. He's more spontaneous. He can come home from the gym and he doesn't matter if they're sweaty and smelly. He might have the interest, whereas with her, it's more about the commitment and the closeness, but also some cleanliness. And if he's got filth all over the room, chances are that's going to be a deterrent. If there's no shower having taken place, chances are that's going to be a deterrent because her senses are going to be more sensitive. This is going to be important to remember. Ladies, regarding the cleanliness aspect, if the filth and the mess in the room is yours and that's the excuse for not having a desire, that's really being unfair to him. He tends to be more spontaneous, but he wants her to be attracted to him, and he wants to be attracted to her. Most of the time, the husband thinks his wife looks best when she's in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. But she knows that if she thinks she's looking at her best, then she's made up. Every now and then, let yourself be made up. Not because it's what he thinks looks best, but because he knows you're putting your best into looking a certain way for him. It lets him know that he's as important as that work event or that social function. And flattering. If you were to take a look at the words of Proverbs 2:16 concerning the flattery of the tongue of the strange woman, and then you compare that with Proverbs 7 beginning in verse 15, here's the woman that comes to a man saying, "I have peace offerings with me. I've paid my vows. I've come forth to meet you. I've sought your face. I filled my bed with coverings of tapestry, with carved works, with fine linens of Egypt. Come, let us take our fill of love till the morning. Let's solace ourselves with loves." Ladies, that's a harlot trying to flatter a man. But if a man has a wife that frequently approaches him in such a way, talking to him in terms of, the room's ready. If she's initiating and complimenting and arranging, it blows his mind. She won't have to worry about him being interested in another. Not if he's a good man at all. because He knows what He has at home. It's okay for her to initiate. It's okay for her to flatter and encourage, and it's okay when we delve into those ideas for her to share her desires with him and him with her. Now, two types of people. Her needs and his needs aren't identical. But when he supplies hers and she supplies his, then they can truly be filling out 4, 3, 2, 1, a one ordained blueprint. Marriage has a pattern. Let's do it right. What God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Not only does God join together, but God keeps it together when we'll follow His blueprint for what love ought to be. It's also important to remember that marriage is a privilege. It's not a right. So when we think about others that aren't able to be married because of past decisions that they've made, see Matthew 19:9. Or others that they're not to enter into these relationships because they're contrary to the will of God. For those that are married, you're involved in a relationship that is a privilege. Not everyone's able to enjoy it. Not everyone's able to return to it. Let's make the most of it. Let's realize what a privilege it is. Let's thank God for it. Thank our spouses. 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 forms of love, 3 threads of commitment, 2 types of people, and 1 ordained blueprint. Now, yes, we've covered a good deal tonight. Hopefully, for those that are wed, you'll go home and talk with your spouse. And you'll ask, are those needs what you need? Sweetheart, am I supplying those needs for you? Honey, how can I do better? How can I communicate better? How can I be more of what you need? Tonight, maybe it's the case that you've never obeyed the gospel of Christ and you're ready to be wed to Him by being baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. If you're ready to study what that means, we can do that. Tonight, maybe you're someone here that's a child of God, but your approach to marriage, your approach to life has not been what God would have it to be. Maybe it's the case you need to repent. Maybe you're a husband that needs to repent for the way that you've treated your wife, or a wife that needs to repent for the way that you've treated your husband. Maybe you're someone that has actually had a detrimental influence on other marriages because you disagreed with the biblical pattern. But now you're ready to say, I'm sorry for the way that I impacted my children's marriage, or my parents' marriage, or my friend's marriage.